very much. Ms. Fishbach, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Neguse, you're recognized.
I thank the chairwoman and the ranking member, and of course, welcome back to all of the chairs and ranking members, and thank you for your testimony today. I, of course, oppose this bill for all of the reasons that my colleagues, Ranking Member McGovern and Representative Scanlon, articulated. I think it is a terrible bill. I think it's cruel. I think it'll have devastating consequences, certainly for the people of Colorado that I represent, but ultimately for millions of Americans across our country. But I will also just say this before I jump into a few questions that I have for the members that are here today. I think that the process has been abysmal. It's a debasement of the way in which the House is supposed to operate. Most of you, the last time you were here in the Rules Committee was at 2 a.m. 4 weeks ago, when we last considered the House version of this bill, because House Republicans decided, in their infinite wisdom, to schedule that hearing in the dead of night, hoping that the American people would not learn what was in the bill, knowing that it was indefensible. Now, of course, a few mere hours after the United States Senate has passed this bill without any final text on what we're actually going to be voting on, we're here considering this bill. It's laughable and, in my view, deeply disrespectful to the way in which the House of Representatives is supposed to function.
Mr. Neguse,
Of course, I'm happy to yield.
would you yield for a question?
Sure.
Are you aware that the Democrats did this when the Senate passed a 4,000-page bill and sent it over to the House, and the Rules Committee met very soon after that?
When was this?
Perhaps. I think, I'm not sure if it was the IRA. I will get you the specific date, but I don't know if you were appalled at the way the House operated then. But I figured you probably weren't aware that the precedent was set very badly by the Democrats. So thank you for yielding.
Madam Chair, I'm going to yield to the ranking member in a moment. First, I would hope that you might ask the team, your team, to provide us with that example so that we can have a more fulsome colloquy instead of you sort of citing a random example that I'm not aware of. But I also would just say, if I guess that Madam Chair is making the case that
I now have the facts. Consolidated Appropriations Bill in 2023.
So an appropriations bill that was bipartisan, that the vast majority of the United States Congress voted on, that's the example you're offering compared to a reconciliation bill that is purely partisan, that not a single Democratic member of the United States Senate or the House of Representatives is voting on? That's the corollary to this particular bill? As Ranking Member Boyle, I think, eloquently put it in questioning, or rather in his answers to Representative Scanlon, the precedents that Republicans are setting in this Congress will certainly be leveraged down the road when political winds shift, and we have seen that on full display over the last month and a half. But in any event, the ranking member wished to jump in. I want to deprive him of that opportunity.
I'm going to withhold my comments because they won't be productive at this moment.
Yeah, and look, I thank the ranking member, or I suppose maybe the chair thanks the ranking member. I guess my point here is, let's dispense with this notion that, every one of the witnesses who are here today, on either side of the aisle, I think the Democratic members would probably concede to this, that they know what is in this bill. We don't know. It was just approved 4 hours ago. None of the members that are gathered here have gone through in detail the wraparound amendment. And I think it's disrespectful to the voters, to the citizens of the country, to pretend otherwise. Who would I ask, I don't know if it's Chair Guthrie or maybe it's Chair Smith, with respect to changes made to HSAs and FSAs and sort of medical spending accounts? I send that question to you.
Yep.
Okay, so under the prior bill, my understanding is there was a provision that allows individuals to utilize discounted health care services at workplace clinics to maintain an HSA. Is that provision still in the bill? Has it been taken out of the bill? What's the...
There's only a couple provisions of the HSAs that stayed intact. The primary care being qualified in HSAs is one.
What about the workplace clinic provision?
I don't believe so.
Okay, how about, there was a provision that allows employees to convert flexible spending arrangements to health reimbursement arrangements. Did that stay in?
I will have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, what about, there was a provision, actually, you all testified to this, I remember, hard to believe, because it was 3 a.m. in the morning during this Rules Committee hearing, but there was a discussion about permitting individuals below a certain income threshold to be able to contribute additional amounts to their HSA every year. Was that included, excluded?
They cut a lot of our HSAs.
Is that one of them?
That's one of them as well.
That was cut, or?
Yeah, it's not in the bill.
Okay, I mean, part of what I'm getting at here, Chair Smith, because you alluded to this earlier, I hear you with respect to the process that you engaged in prior to the bill's consideration by this committee, the House version. But no one can argue that this is good governance, that we should all gather here and in real time figure out together what provisions of the bill that was passed by the House had survived and which were excised as part of a political gamesmanship to get the necessary votes in the Senate. That's my process point here.
If, in regards to the tax portion of the bill, there's 103 different tax provisions that's in the Senate version. Of those 103, 85% of them are either identical or just technical changes because of the parliamentarian of what we passed out of the House.
What are the new ones? Are there new ones?
Yes, there are. Let me read these to you. So the new ones that they added was the dyed fuels, which is Ms. Moore's provision that she likes. New markets was included, made permanent, the new markets tax credit program. They eliminated the deduction on sports teams owners that was in there. They eliminated the SALT workaround that was within the House bill. I'm trying to just do tax through here.
Sure.
The increase in excise tax on private foundations was eliminated, which we had in the House bill. They also lowered the rates on the endowment taxes. We had a 21% rate. They kept the same brackets, but their highest is 8%. They did a child care boost to the CDC, TC, and FSAs. The CHIPS and Science Act's tax credit was adjusted in this bill, and also the charitable deduction.
I think you're missing one.
Which one is that?
Whalers.
What's that?
A new tax break for whalers, right?
Whalers.
Am I?
Are you talking about allowing someone who
Fishermen.
uses a harpin to deduct the cost of that harpin?
Correct.
That's included. It's a business expense.
It's a new tax break,
It's
right?
a business expense that was capped at $10,000, and now they can deduct it.
Up to $50,000, right?
Yes.
Yes. Why was that added? I think we all know.
You would
right?
have to talk to the senators.
I'd have to talk to the senators. I don't know, it was kind of convenient, Chairman Smith, that was the one addition that you omitted from that list you provided. But I think I
There's
would
probably more that I
well,
left off
that may be
here.
the case. I think it's emblematic of the broken process that the Senate engaged in. That as we go through this 900-page bill, we will find a variety of different provisions that different senators inserted for their own purposes. And of course, one of them was this whaling tax deduction for the 160 or so people that will be able to claim that in the state of Alaska, so that one of the senators from Alaska would feel comfortable voting for the bill. I don't think that that's, in my view, the way this process should unfold. But in any event, while we're having this colloquy, Chairman Smith,
Is that all it took?
I'm not
I
sure.
mean,
Yeah.
boy, she's a cheap date if that's all
So,
it took, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, we talked a bit, or rather, I know you talked a bit with the ranking member previously about the way in which this bill's benefits are distributed, and that's been a topic of conversation throughout this hearing. I want to talk about one particular example that, to me, and it's perhaps an ideological dispute, I suspect, between the two of us here, that crystallizes the way in which this bill benefits the wealthy few. This bill includes an increase in the estate tax cap, correct? It goes up to $30 million?
15 million per person.
15 million per person, $30 million for a married couple.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Do you know what state benefits the most from that provision?
I can tell you of the family farmers in my congressional district that benefits from that provision, and that is what it's focused on in
But what
regards
state?
to Missouri.
No, I know you represent Missouri. I'm asking you, this provision, right? In which state in the union?
How about you tell me? That would be great.
I'm happy to tell you, it's California. California has the most individuals, 742 people to be exact, 742 estates that benefited in the most recent tax year from this particular deduction, right? That is to say, by increasing it, you will, hold on, I'll give you a chance, of course, Mr. Smith, I'm not, but the state that has the most individuals that will benefit from this provision happens to be California. That's not me saying that, that's empirical data. Now, what is the population of Missouri?
Over 6 million.
Over 6 million, it's not similar size to Colorado. How many estates were subject to this tax in the last year?
It all depends. I don't know how many people died in the last year, but what I will tell you, in your district alone, 3,700 farms, just farms, are affected by this provision for family farms.
I can tell you
That's pretty substantial,
that above the
37
limit,
vote.
above the $30 million limit, right, or excuse me, under the $28, because right now it's, what's the number now, 26 or $28 million for a married couple?
It's 14 million, 28 million.
Correct, 28 million. So I can tell you that in Missouri, the number is 44. 44 estates that ultimately would be subject to that estate tax.
I don't believe that number.
I will provide you the
Yeah, people can make a lot of numbers,
Well,
but I can tell you in my district alone,
Sure.
there's over 4,000 family farms that are falling underneath this trap of the death tax.
we will follow up.
Yeah.
And happy to engage with you further on it. Chairman Arrington,
Yes, sir.
welcome back.
Good to be back.
So this is your third time testifying in the last month and a half.
And the third time's the charm. I think I'm going to convince you to support this bill.
Here's where I'm struggling, Chairman Arrington, is that the first time you came on the budget resolution, right? Second time you came on the House version of this bill.
That's correct.
Now you're here on the Senate version of this bill.
Yes.
Every time you testify, this bill gets more expensive, right? I mean, you don't contest that. It's gotten more expensive since the first time you were here.
The Senate bill's more expensive than the House. I'll
Sure.
concede that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
We set the targets the first
course,
time.
yeah.
Second time, we had the policies.
and this isn't, these aren't.
Gotcha question.
Yeah, not a gotcha question. This is the Center for, Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, right? Headline, this is just 2 days ago. Newest Senate reconciliation bill would explode the debt, right? It says here, if you thought the House bill borrowed too much, and it did, the Senate manages to make things even worse. This $4 trillion borrowing bonanza is fiscally dangerous at a time of already exploding debt. It would borrow $1 trillion more than the House bill, violates the House's reconciliation instructions by hundreds of billions of dollars, littered with special interest giveaways, right? So this bill continues to get more and more expensive. Committee for Responsible Federal Budget agrees. The litany of organizations that Ranking Member Boyle and Ranking Member McGovern agree. The House Freedom Caucus, of course, of which we have a number of members here that serve on the committee, that are members of the committee. They concede that as well, right? Tweeted out, the Senate's version adds $651 billion to the deficit, and that's before interest costs, which nearly double the total. Chairman, I have made this request of you every time you're here, that at some juncture, you might say, you know, this is a bridge too far. Because you have championed deficit reduction earlier in your career. But, you know, the Speaker is asking you to defend something that is indefensible with respect to deficit reduction. And it's not me making this case. So I just, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond here, but what do you say to the House Freedom Caucus? What do you say to the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget? Why not engage in a conference? Why accept what the Senate has sent you at face value? You're the chairman of the Budget Committee.
Well, I think you would agree that in large legislative initiatives like this one, Democrat-led or Republican, there are things you like about a bill, things you don't like about a bill, things that you, and certainly that exists for this bill with me. I have my policy preferences, and I'm certain that my colleagues do as well. I'm concerned that neither party has been serious in addressing this unsustainable debt trajectory that we're on and a debt crisis that looms large for the country. I'm concerned that neither party has.
But you're the chair. I mean,
Yeah,
you have the
no,
opportunity to guide that now.
And
You've got a lot of authority.
And as you know, I've championed that concern.
Help me understand
Yeah.
why did it get more expensive? So here, maybe that's a sort of
I
too
think
simplistic of a question. What happened in the Senate? Why did this bill get
Yeah.
more expensive?
Yeah,
What did they add that increased the cost?
Well, the savings in the, on the SNAP side, or in the ag jurisdiction, I think it's about $100 billion loss in savings on the Senate side versus the House side. There were more savings in the Senate on Medicaid reform versus the House side. You know, all of that, when you go through the details on the
but it's still way
policy-
more expensive.
No,
you're
I'm
saying
going to
in the
get to
aggregate.
exactly, I think it's mostly a wash on mandatory program reforms. Gain some, lose some. The tax policy is where the additional expenses, that's where the preponderance
Got it.
of the difference in cost in the Senate versus the House.
So why not go through this bill and find some opportunities to get some of the pork out of the bill, which I presume would, maybe satiate some of your colleagues in the House Freedom Caucus, certainly would be a lot less harmful to the deficit. I mean, why not? Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
This bill includes a slush fund for OMB, upwards of $100 million. You're familiar with that?
I'm familiar with a lot of the funding.
Right?
in this
And
bill.
that wasn't in the House version. So, you're not going to ask
Yeah.
all of your colleagues to just give a $100 million blank check to the Office of Management and Budget. That doesn't seem like good fiscal policy to me. I can't imagine that you think that that's good fiscal policy.
Well, if it was used, for example, to.
Oh, come on,
provi-
Chair
No,
Arrington.
this is a fair and true statement, and I think I've said it before. If I haven't, I've believed it. I think there are ways to invest money in the oversight and the infrastructure to actually prevent fraudulent and even unintended overpayments.
So is there no pork
there's
in this
ways-
bill then?
There's, and OMB, in fairness to OMB,
No, I'm talking about in the bill.
yeah.
There's no pork in this bill that we can take. It's a pork-free bill in your view? That's it? This is just,
if you'll ask me specifics.
what
I'll-
about the Garden of Heroes? $40 million for President Trump's Garden of Heroes. Can't we, why not just say, you know what? We've got a huge deficit, and that's probably not the most prudent way to spend our taxpayer dollars. Let's just reallocate that $40 million. That's a bridge too far for you?
Well, I think there's not a bill that I've read and reviewed since I've been a member of Congress, certainly since I've been the budget chair, that I felt lived up perfectly to what I thought we ought to do in stewardship of tax dollars.
And I
And what
hear
I
that.
thought was consistent with the constitutional scope and
I hear you.
of this,
I hear you, Chair
of
Arrington,
this
but I
federal
think
government.
you could understand our struggle because, as I said, last 7 weeks, you've testified a few times here. Every time you testify, this bill gets more expensive.
Yeah.
And the answer is always, well, down the road, of course, we could address this, and there are ways in which we can try to identify potential places where funding, where potential cuts can be identified, so on and so forth. Here is an example right in front of you. $40 million. You could take care of that today. There's an amendment, I believe, that was submitted. You could rule that in order and say, you know what, we're going to put that $40 million towards deficit reduction. If you're serious about wanting to address the fiscal health of the country. But to me, I think this bill couldn't be a worse representation, respectfully, of fiscal discipline. You have a bill that, according to the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, is more aggregated than the CARES Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law and the CHIPS and Science bill combined, all 4 bills are equivalent. This bill takes the cake. It's bigger than all of them. And I just don't know how one can justify supporting it.
I disagree with that statement.
I
but
know
hear
you
what
disagree
you're
with that
saying. Okay.
assessment
Yeah.
on the, and I'm hoping I can get you, maybe by the end of this hearing, to support the removing the Garden of Heroes funding, so that we can at least maybe make a crack at addressing some, fiscal sanity in the country. Maybe Mr. Roy might consider supporting that amendment. We'll see. I wonder, obviously, we've talked a lot about all the folks who oppose this bill. I'm sure you saw Elon Musk very has been very vocal about his opposition to this bill. You're aware of that.
I am aware of that.
And
Sincerely held convictions.
you disagree with, you think he's wrong?
No, I think he has sincerely held convictions about the runaway spending.
But then
that's
why not
driving
follow
the
his,
bill.
I mean, he has
I don't
encouraged everybody to.
I don't follow any man in
You don't follow
particular.
any man?
I follow my conscience.
Let me read you a quote.
If
from
I
a-
may,
let
just-
me-
just
let me
because I
just
thi-
finish this quote. I'll read it to you, then you
Okay,
can respond.
and then you'll let me
This is
respond.
from your website. This is from your website on May 29th. Quote, this is the headline, Arrington applauds Elon Musk's leadership. And the quote here is, we should not only appreciate Elon's courageous leadership, but follow it by holding Washington accountable, rooting out waste, restoring fiscal sanity before the debt burden crushes the future of this great nation. So I don't,
Yeah, I
sounds
agree.
like you were telling people about a month ago that
100%.
that folks should follow his lead on debt
100%.
reduction, but it's a different tune you're
No,
singing
it's
today.
not. We cut twice the amount of spending that has ever been reduced in the people's government, in the history of the people's government. So, if you're looking to make the argument this bill isn't perfect when it comes to any principle, including fiscal discipline, you win.
Well, I
Because
appreciate
it's
that.
not perfect. And so you win. I mean, honestly. But to say that, the old Ronald Reagan 80-20, fill in the blank, in not so perfect processes, in a political process, having significant reforms on the fiscal side, like the spending cuts, like the welfare reforms that are long overdue, much needed, like preventing, which 40-some-odd Democrats opposed, preventing taxpayer dollars to flow to people who are here illegally. That, I think, is all consistent with what I
hear you.
understand Elon Musk's
And I hear you,
concerns
Mr.
are.
Chairman, but I would just simply say, I mean, again, it's part of the frustration for me, and I suspect many Americans, is that there's sort of this notion that we don't have the agency to shape the bill. So, if we as a Congress decide that we don't really want to have special interest tax breaks for tanning salons, as was the case in the original bill that the House put forward, or for whaling deductions, all right? If we decide that we don't want to spend $40 million on the Garden of Heroes at the White House, we can proceed with shaping policy that does precisely that. And I would just venture to say, Mr. Chairman, that it feels like you have an opportunity here. You have a number of members on this committee on the other side of the aisle who've expressed their opposition to the bill and their indication that they're going to vote against the rule. And I would hope that you take that opportunity to perhaps change course. I want to move to the SNAP cuts and also just the agriculture title of the bill, and to Ranking Member Craig and to Chairman Thompson. So, Chairman Thompson, I guess I want to understand more clearly what you all are trying to achieve with this state cost, this sort of new imposition of state costs with respect to SNAP. Because my understanding was that this was designed originally to try to incentivize improvement in SNAP payments, right? State-based, right? Basically to reduce the error rate. Is that right, or am I?
Yeah, the ultimate goal was to have the state, who's a partner within the SNAP nutrition program. Obviously, they've had no skin in the game before, and as I said in my opening remarks, there is a tendency, if you're spending somebody else's money, you're reckless with it. If you have have to spend even part of your own money, you pay closer to the attention of the effectiveness. And we have been, the error rates have been.
It's a real problem.
It's been a real problem. My own state of Pennsylvania, under Governor Shapiro, it was at 17%. I'm glad they got it down to 11%. as of the data that came out yesterday, but that's still unacceptable. If it's an underpayment, that's a family that's, once their EBT, is looking to their EBT card to be loaded appropriately, so when they go to the grocery store, they know that resource there. It's not, and it's supplemental. It's in addition to everything else in their lives, right? But still, if it's an underpayment, it hurts those family members. If it's an overpayment, believe it or not, it hurts even more. They're going to spend it because it's there. But then the states will come back, whether it's 2 months or 6 months, and they'll claw all that back. And all of a sudden, these families find that they have no money in a given month. And so these error rates have been absolutely
The bottom line, we got to get the error rates down.
Absolutely. So this is meant to be an incentive.
Exactly.
And I
Here's the question.
Yep.
Under the bill as it's drafted now, the higher your error rate, the more likely you are to get a waiver not to have to pay anything as a state.
Well, but it's short term. It's for a number of years.
But why give states?
Well, you know what? You'd have to sit down with the senators to figure out why they did that. Alaska's one of them, I think.
But does that make sense to
The gentlelady
you?
from Pennsylvania named the states that wound up on that.
Correct, the 10 states, Oregon, New Jersey.
It was a Senate amendment, delayed implementation of state, and it's a delayed implementation of state
Correct.
cost share. It
But
doesn't.
why does that, I guess what I'm trying to understand, and you may not.
Why did they do it?
Well,
Well, we're all in politics. We know why they did it in the Senate, in order to get certain votes from certain
and
states
if that
to
is
be
the
able
case,
to pass that.
does that not violate the very objective that you all were trying to achieve? Let me explain why, and I'll give you a chance.
Doesn't long-term, because
Okay.
it does result in a state share.
let's say it this
just
way.
gives them more time
Sure.
to be able to get there.
Let me say it this way. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy's here. Texas has an error rate that hovers around 6%. So right now, under the bill, as it is proposed, Texas wouldn't necessarily, if it stays below that 6%, doesn't have to pay a state portion-based cost for SNAP. If it gets above 6%, say jumps up to 6.5%, for the next several years, Texas, the state of Texas, and Texas taxpayers have to foot the bill of a state pro rata cost.
That's correct. With
Hold on,
something they've
I'm not
never
asking
had
a question. Mr.
They've
Thompson,
never had a payment in.
I'm not asking a question. Texas has to
Please
do so.
do.
I will. Texas has to do so. Oregon right now, which has one of the highest error rates in the country, does not have to pay a single taxpayer dollar towards this program. You have designed a program in which you are incentivizing states to have a higher error rate. If you're a state, and Ranking Member Craig, maybe no, I'm asking Ranking Member Craig
It's a
question.
transition plan.
She can answer if she'd like. If you are a state with an error rate of 10% or 11% or 12%, if you can get your error rate higher,
That's right.
then under this bill, you won't have to pay a dime.
And you get, under this bill that came back today from the Senate, in fact, you get 2 bites at the apple over 2 years to get your error rate up so that you can not have to pay the cost shift for a period of time.
It's insanity.
It's
So
insanity.
A state like Colorado or Missouri or Texas, the states that are trying to keep their error rates down and are doing a good job of it, they get penalized. Meanwhile, New Jersey, Oregon, Alaska, states with a high error rate benefit. Insanity. I don't, and maybe there's another Republican here, Chairman, and I know this is not outside of your respective departments. So, but if Chair Guthrie or Chair Arrington or Chair Smith want to jump in to defend that particular provision, I don't, and by the way, I mean, before I give that opportunity, I don't know, we'll see if this bill passes in the House. But I can assure you that if it doesn't pass, if there are enough Republican members who say, you know what, this is a bridge too far, this provision is not surviving. It's not going to survive the sunlight of the next 48 hours. There's no way. I am calling it now. I cannot imagine that Republicans are going to say, yeah, we're fine with Portland paying not a dime for a state portion of SNAP. We're going to instead just make sure that we impose these costs on the states that are actually doing a good job.
And you do realize that none of the states will
Are
pay
doing it now,
for
correct.
the immediate future. Zero
course.
states because it is an implementation
Yes, but you've
plan.
delayed it even further for the worst offenders. So this, basically, if you're a state, you are incentivized to get that error rate up, get it up to 18%. That way you can delay having to comply with this mandate as long as possible. Ranking Member Craig?
Mr. Neguse, excuse me, I just want to say I may never have another chance in my entire career here to say that I agree with Chip Roy. So I'd like to get that on the record here in my testimony today. And secondly, beyond the Republicans in this room agreeing that this is a good policy, try going home to your own constituents in a state with a low error rate and explaining to your county commissioners why they, in 10 states across this country, are actually going to have to increase taxes at the local level so that these 10 states, the other 10 states with high error rates, don't have to pay their fair share of taxes. Again, I've just never seen anything as ridiculous as what we've seen come over from the Senate. And I wish my colleagues on the other side of the aisle could stand up and say, no, we need more time, we need to fix this.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you, Ranking Member Craig. I think you articulated it well. As I said, whaling taxes, tanning salons, all the pork and nonsense that has been included in this bill, this provision it really is the most nonsensical. And Chair Arrington?
If I may.
Maybe you might,
Yeah,
go
well,
ahead,
yeah,
of
if I
course.
may.
Yeah.
You know what the cost share is today of states that have an error rate of, let's just use Alaska since it's a subject of
Yeah.
conversation, 60%. 60%, 60 cents on the dollar error rate. You know what the policy is today and under the last 4 years of the Democrat administration and the leadership of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle?
Yes,
Zero.
no cost. Yeah,
Zero,
correct.
zero. So I believe you to be a fair person. I'm sure that the indignation that you have over not phasing this in as quickly as maybe we all would want, I certainly would be one to say we should implement it effective immediately, but it hasn't even existed, and I think you would agree.
But why give that special break to New Jersey?
You know,
Over
I
Texas.
don't know that I can answer that, but I can tell you that having 4 years when you all had total control over this process, when you jammed a partisan bill, it was a tax and spending bill called the Inflation Reduction Act, this wasn't addressed then. I would say kudos to Republicans. It's not perfect, once again, but we're going to phase in accountability for states who have a 60 cents on the dollar error rate. If we could get that implemented today, I'd take it. If we can get it
I
in 2
indulge you,
years, that's
Chairman.
better than what it was.
I indulge you,
Okay.
Chairman. I would just simply say, I think that's going to be a hell of an argument to make to the people in West Texas 2 years from now to say, look, I get it. I know y'all are paying more now for SNAP, by virtue of this new mandate, but just rest assured, the people in Oregon and the people in New Jersey who are, or rather the state governments there, who are doing a far worse job with respect to the error rate, don't worry, they're not paying a dime. That doesn't seem like an argument that I would think Republicans want to make to their constituents, but I'm not a Republican. So, Ranking Member Craig?
Yeah, I just like to, this is, certainly want to make sure all my Republican colleagues know this, but high error rates actually are subject to sanctions. And in fact, USDA fined Alaska $12 million last year for failing to ensure SNAP recipients are eligible. Pennsylvania was fined as well over the last couple of years. So there is a penalty for high error rates in this country.
Thank you.
But
Last
now
question.
there's a reward for them.
Last question I have for Chair Guthrie. Couldn't of course, didn't want you to feel neglected here. I want to talk about the hospital fee, the provider fees. Ranking Member McGovern kind of cited to some of the criticism and the concern that the Senate bill that we're now considering has elicited from rural hospitals. That's certainly true in my district. I think, as you and I maybe talked previously, I represent a really large geographic district in western Colorado, a lot of rural hospitals who are deeply concerned that if this bill is signed into law, it's going to be devastating for rural parts of my district. And I have read similar refrains from folks in Kentucky, right? So the article that Ranking Member McGovern quoted, the title is Kentucky Hospitals Leader warns Senate megabill would devastate health care and the economy. And I'll just quote to you 2 sentences. The advocacy group for Kentucky hospitals is sounding the alarm about a massive bill that's near passage in the U.S. Senate, saying its cuts to Medicaid could cause the closure of hospitals and loss of 20,000 jobs. The Kentucky Hospital Association has changed its tune on the bill since May, when it supported a version that passed the House, making it an outlier among state and national healthcare groups. So the point here, right, Chairman, is that even those organizations that maybe had a different worldview than mine about the House bill are now ringing the alarm very loudly, saying there will be rural hospitals that could potentially close in Kentucky and in Colorado. And I make the same request of you that I made of Chair Arrington. Why not conference with the Senate and say, you know what, this is untenable. I'm not going to allow Owensboro Health Twin Lakes Medical Hospital, right, which is one of the hospitals in your district, right, that just said recently, while we don't know the direct impact any potential changes would have, we are certain the proposed cuts to Medicaid would harm access to health care not only in Western Kentucky but across the country. I mean, clearly, this is going to have an impact. I just don't think that anyone can argue in good faith that it's not going to.
So if we all discuss this, and we discussed it in the House, and if you look at provider taxes, it goes back to President Obama. So the Senate version takes it to 3.5% for states that didn't expand, or that did expand. Kentucky's an expansion state. President Obama had that number for a safe harbor for provider taxes within his 2014 budget. President Biden called it a scam. I've never called it a scam. It's a loophole. The provider tax is a loophole. And I would understand hospitals and others that if they can take their money, come up, match federal money, and bring it back down to the state. So we knew that it needed to be addressed. We chose in the House version to do it with a freeze so that people would have what they had this year for next year. The Senate has chosen, and we're debating, and we're going to be debating, I'm sure, after we get through this rules meeting, about where we go with it. But if you look at Medicaid policy, a lot of the issues has been that particularly now that it's 90-10 for expansion states, that when it was first designed in the 1960s and through most of the time, states run the policy. It's an open-ended checkbook on the federal government, but the discipline has always been that the states have to put their money in as well. But now they're able to tax the healthcare entities that receive the money. Some states are actually taxing the managed care, Medicaid managed care organizations that receive the money. And so it's just become almost an open-ended checkbook on the federal government. So we're going to debate it and see which way we go. But I will tell you that it needs to be addressed, and we intend to address it, and we'll see where we go.
Well, I will stop. Yeah, I see that my time is running along here, so I appreciate the chairwoman's indulgence. I'll simply say there are a lot of rural hospitals that will close if this bill becomes law.
Well, that assumes, because I had some people from Kentucky come to me, since you brought Kentucky up, and say, y'all need to make this a priority. When we were debating whether it was going to cut back, y'all need to make this a priority. It's people from Kentucky government. And so that says, well, and then my answer back to them, why don't you make it a priority? Because so the 3.5% is where the state takes the money to match. And so they don't have to put any money in their general fund. So they're wanting us to make it a priority, which I do make it a priority. I want my hospitals to be successful, but the state also has to pay their share as well.
And I would just simply say, similar to the point that I articulated in my colloquy with Chair Arrington, I think it's going to be awfully tough. It's going to be awfully tough for your members to make the argument that you just made. I hear what you're saying. I understand you're saying, well, the state needs to step up to the plate and so on and so forth, and state legislatures will have to. That's an argument that you're obviously entitled to make, but there's a reason that the House bill didn't include the cut that the Senate bill has now proposed with respect to the rate, to the hospital rate fee, and so, or excuse me, to the hospital provider rate. And in my view, I think it's a mistake, and I think it's going to have devastating consequences for rural America. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Neguse. Mr. Roy, you're recognized.
I thank the chairwoman. It is rare indeed that I have too many reasons to agree in this room, but I do have to go ahead and start with the absurdity of that provision.